Experimentation can be a super scary word for small business owners. I mean, you're diving into the unknown, and who knows if whatever you're testing is going to truly work out. But in fact, some of the best results I've ever had in my business have come from this process of experimentation. There's less pressure to be perfect. You can try out new things and let yourself learn without this huge commitment to stick with it long term. In this video, I'm going to tell you more about why I love experimentation, how I design an experiment for my business, and give you 7 steps for designing your next strategic experiment. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, my name is Haley Dale, and I am a content strategist helping you create more productive, purposeful, and yes, profitable content. So if that sounds like something you're looking for, make sure to hit the subscribe button below this video and subscribe for new, juicy, jam-packed videos every single Monday. So today we're talking about experimentation, and I have to say, because I'm a content strategist, I feel like people expect me to have all of the answers when it comes to their own content strategy that I just don't have, right? I could design what I think would be the perfect bee's knees content strategy for you, but it might not necessarily be right for you. A lot of these answers have to come internally about what is and isn't going to work for you. Yes, you can design them as part of a collaborative process, but you are ultimately the CEO, the head honcho of your business, and it's your way or the highway. So you get to decide what works for you. Now, maybe you're in a position where you don't know exactly what that is, what is going to work for you and what isn't going to work for you. And that is why, my friend, I love experimentation, especially content experiments, so much. One of the big reasons that I endorse experimentation as a strategic approach is mainly because it releases us from the pressure of failing. We have enough mindset junk going on in our heads that we don't need that extra pressure of failing operating over here, calling our attention. So when failure stops feeling personal because it's just the outcome of an experiment, it frees us up to try new things. It helps us take more risks in a really safe container. If something fails, it's not a reflection on us. It's just the experiment didn't work. The outcome wasn't what we expected. And that can really help us choose and take on new things that maybe we wouldn't in another situation. Another reason is that it helps you commit in a safe way. It doesn't mean because I'm saying yes to trying this new thing that I expect it to go on forever and ever. I'm just open to see what the potential is, what the possibility is if I try it out. So are you ready to design your strategic experiment? I'm going to walk you through 7 steps, as well as tell you about an example that I recently used in my own business as well. So step number 1 is to start with a question, an interest, or a curiosity. So any great experiment starts with a research question, as my husband would tell me, even though this is going to be the least scientifically sound experiment ever, so go with it. But it starts with a question such as, will X work for me? And maybe you saw a strategy that someone else was using and you're curious about how it would work in your own business, or maybe you saw something working in a completely other industry and you think, I'd like to try that on for size. Or maybe you just have this long list of ideas that are just sitting there collecting dust because you're having trouble finding the space in your calendar to try them. So maybe just choose one and design experiment. You don't need to do all of them at once. In fact, with any experiment, in order for it to truly to get the results and the data that we need out of them, choosing one to work at a time is a much better way to go. So for me this year, one of the things I was interested in was Instagram. It wasn't a platform that I had prioritized previously because it felt like a whole lot of work for not a whole lot of traffic to my website because of the way Instagram is set up. So at the beginning of this year, my question was, will Instagram help me create more connections? Will it help me form more relationships with people? Will it help me establish myself more as a budding thought leader in the content strategy world? Plus, I was really interested in meeting more people, having more opportunities for collaborations down the road. So that was my big motivation, and that was my question going into it. Will Instagram work for me for these things? Step 2, let yourself learn, but put a cap on it. So because you're trying something new, you likely have a bit of learning curve that you need to, some things that you need to learn, some things that you need to get up to speed with about this experiment that you're going to take on. But I know that we can sometimes, as business owners, as overachievers, we can get really stuck in learning. Learning is one of those things that feels really productive, even though it's not. It feels like we're doing something because we're taking a course, but unless we're taking it into action, taking action on it, we're not actually doing anything. But with that said, when you're taking on something new, yes, you're going to need to learn new things. So what I like to say is, give yourself a time limit. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 days. I'm going to let myself learn about this experiment or this area that I'm taking on to just see how I can design this experiment, how I can gather some info. So for myself with Instagram, I felt really out of the loop of everything that was happening back when I had, previously tried it seriously, which wasn't very often. I don't think stories were even a thing yet. And hashtags have changed and evolved a lot since then, and the different tools that you use to publish your posts and the different tools for analytics had changed a lot. And so I gave myself 5-ish days, a business week, to really go in and learn. And I went through Kelsey Chapman's Instagram course, which was great. I read a bunch of articles. I searched like crazy on Pinterest for Instagram tips, but I really brought myself up to speed with what was working there currently. But I definitely put a limit on the amount of time that I was going to invest in learning. Step 3, define your hypothesis. So like any science experiment, we got to come up with a hypothesis and what we think is going to happen. So this can be based around what we want to see happen from our experiment, but we want to frame it as a hypothesis. And this comes into how I mentioned we want to distance ourselves from failure here. We are putting out what we think is going to happen as a result from this experiment, but we're also having some detachment from that outcome. So it's a safe way of setting a goal and trying out a new experiment without having to own that failure. If it ends up not resulting in this thing, there's not, you have no skin in the game. It was just a failure of that experiment. If it goes even better, amazing, right? That's just a bonus cherry on top. So from my Instagram experiment, I thought by focusing on Instagram for the next 90 days, I started in January, that I would cultivate new relationships, have more conversations in my DMs, and get invited to collaborate at least once. So that was my hypothesis going into my Instagram experiment. Step number 4, design your experiment. So when it comes to defining and designing your experiment, you want to think about what are the things that I'm going to need to do in order to follow through. So I like to think about what are the daily things, what are the weekly things, what are the monthly things. And some of the questions that I answer are all around that what, when, how, and where questions. Like, what am I going to be doing? What am I going to be measuring? What are you going to be using to do it? What tools and stuff do you need? Are you going to be using any tools, any checklists that you can put together? Why are you doing it? And then how are you doing it? What are the steps that you're going to take on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis, or some other frequency? So with my Instagram experiment, on a weekly basis, I was going to be using Planoly to schedule out content. And then I also had a daily checklist that I was going to be doing, really inspired by Pat Flynn's handshake habits from his Superfans book. I'll put a link to it below. All about responding to anyone who had commented on my content, anyone who sent me a DM in my messenger. I don't even know what it's called. I'm such a great Instagrammer, but basically just making sure that I was being super responsive and responding to everything that had come, kind of this returning the handshake habit, as Pat Flynn would say. So step number 5 was to follow through. So now that you know what you're going to be doing, you have to actually go through and doing it. So how are you going to be doing them? This is where I would think about how can I make my job easier? So if I have a daily set of actions that I'm going to be taking for this experiment, can I set up a bookmark folder, or can I put a folder on my phone of the different icons? Just so I need to only go to one place in order to make this happen. It could also be a checklist that you create for yourself, anything that takes out some of the guesswork when you're actually following through on that experiment. So what can you do to make your job easier? And think about that in terms of what have you identified as your daily actions, and what are the tools and resources that you're going to prepare for yourself in order to make following through on that a lot easier. Same thing for your weekly stuff, same thing for your monthly stuff. So a crucial step in any experimentation is measurement. So you're going to want to measure at the end of the experiment, as well as some predefined midpoints throughout. So if you committed to a 90-day experiment, probably measuring every 30 days or every week, depending on what the experiment is. But you want to think about what happens happened during the experiment? What were the numbers, right? So what were the hardcore quantitative things, like the number of followers or traffic or engagement, depending on what your experiment is. But you also want to make room for that qualitative assessment as well. So did certain measurable things happen? So in my example of the Instagram, like what collaboration opportunities came to me from my Instagram experiment? So those aren't necessarily hard numbers that I would go into Google Analytics to find or Instagram Analytics to find, but they would be things that I could measure. Plus, finally, at the end of the day, was your hypothesis proven correct? Step 7 is decision. So now that you've gone through this experiment, and I recommend either a 30-day or a 90-day experiment, did your hypothesis come true? And is this something that you're going to continue with? Is this something that you're going to take from a one-time experiment into a regular part of your strategy? And at the end of the day, depending on your results, you might find that maybe you want to try the experiment again with some different conditions. Maybe you've learned something in this experiment that you want to implement next time. So it could be a refinement process. And remember, like, there is no failing in experimentation. But with anything, there is no failure unless you quit, right? So if you keep going until it's successful, well, then you're not going to fail. So if it's something that you really want to do and maybe it didn't work out exactly as planned, is there something different that you can try and test out this experiment one more time? So I hope that you make this experimentation part of your regular process. I am publishing my first book, Your Content Rebellion, and this experimental approach is key in my book. I call them play shops, and it's all about using these experiments to come up with a content strategy that is truly aligned to you, rather than taking on all of the shoulds that we are told we should be doing for our content and our marketing. So I would love to know what your first experiment is going to be. And if you want more videos like this, let me know about it. Like this video or subscribe so you get notified every time I post a new video, which is on Mondays. So I hope to see you again soon.